Good morning, everyone. It is a real honor for me to participate in today's sessions. Many of you have never met me. I'm one of these people that works, my team works tirelessly in the laboratory on the 5th floor of the Center for Brain Health. We are the people whose job it is to identify new treatments and make sure that they're going to be safe and make sure that we know how they might work before we can offer them in clinical trials. There is a great deal of work that goes on behind the scenes, listening to your questions, talking to the clinicians who are looking after you and your loved ones, taking those questions back to the basic research laboratory and trying to figure out new ways to tackle this disease. That's what me and my group do. And so it is a rare treat for me to be able to be here today to share some of the exciting information that we have. Before I delve into that, though, let me touch on the importance of supporting research, not only as a research participant, but from the financial perspective. None of these efforts are inexpensive. It takes a lot of time and a lot of money to support the research and make sure that we are keeping up to the pace of our capabilities as a world-class dementia center. There is probably no more important time in our Canadian history than now to act on this. You saw earlier today a release of $350 million of US dollars focused on dementia research. We would really appreciate similar movements in Canada. The reality of our current funding climate is this. Today you've heard many researchers talk about projects that are ongoing or that could be offered. However, this year within Canada, our federal funding for research in health sciences, including dementia, is estimated to be only 5% success. That means that 1 out of every 20 projects will receive the funding that it needs to go forward. 1 out of 20. So you've heard many, many great ideas and great projects that need continued support for them to continue and not be delayed only because of the financial support. There are many ways for you to do this. There are opportunities to contribute to funding bodies like the Alzheimer's Society. There are ways to contribute to the VGH Foundation so that your dollars can be directed to some of the projects that you have heard about today. But you've seen the commitment and the passion and the excitement and the quality of all the people on this team. We need your help as well. Okay. So my group works on a number of these environmental risk factors that you've heard about today that can influence dementia risk and may identify new ways that we can treat dementia even very, very early in the progress of the disease. So today I'm going to develop a little bit more along the topic of the whole question of fats and why this is really important for the brain, why we are now beginning to understand why what is good for the heart is good for the brain. So the first layer of this question is realizing that most of the genes that we know contribute to dementia risk somehow involve how your body uses fats. And the chief gene among this group is ApoE that you've heard about before. It comes in a variety of genetic forms within the population, and its job is to carry fat around within the brain. You might not realize how important fats are from the brain, but today I'm going to try to show you why. It's our vision that in the next few years, we might have drugs or chemicals in our hands that we can manipulate how much ApoE you have in the brain and how well it works leading to the first time in history for the possibility that ApoE genetic status, whether you're ApoE3 or ApoE4, might demarcate different routes of treatment that we will be able to offer. Just like in cancer research, where your treatment is governed by knowing what is going on in a particular tumor from the genetic point, hopefully we will be there soon for dementia. Here's a trivia question you can quiz your family about later on tonight. And that is that 60% of your brain is made up of fats. Wow, it's the most fat-rich organ in your body. And the way you can even see the fats, you know when you have a beautiful steak and you see the marbling in the steak, that marbling is fat. Okay. It's actually really important in your brain because you probably have heard of gray matter and white matter, yes, in the context of the brain, but that white matter, that's the fatty part of your brain. And the reason that it's white is that that's what the color of this fat is, and that fat is used as an insulating factor in the neurons in your brain. So for the brain to communicate within the different regions and the different neurons, the different cells in the brain, they need that electrical signal to go through those white matter tracks. That's how your brain is wired together. And that makes up 60% of your total brain tissue. We now have ways in which we can do brain scans and look at how well these white matter tracks exist in the brain. And these are techniques that you might start to hear about. For example, diffusion tensor imaging. And these beautiful artistic pictures are actually real scans of the white matter showing how the different brain regions connect to one another. These advanced new imaging capabilities are now giving us insights into how damage of these white matter tracks can affect how one region of the brain talks to another region of the brain, affecting cognition, memory, a host of other examples. So what you're seeing here are brain scans that are correlating the individual wires in the brain with certain cognitive tasks. And these are just a hint of the amazing new research studies that are out there that are investigating things related to fat and the fat importance in the brain. The other area that I would like to spend a lot of time on today is the whole question of blood vessel health and your brain's function. So this gets to the good for the heart, good for the brain side of things. We've heard quite a few speakers today already mention this topic, but I'm going to try to tell you how this might work. So on the left-hand side, what you're seeing here is a cast of all the blood vessels in the brain. It's quite an amazing picture. There are if you laid up all the blood vessels in your brain from end to end, it would be 100,000 miles of blood vessels in your brain. So this is why 20% of the blood from every heartbeat is directed into the brain. Your brain is utterly dependent on having a healthy vascular system for that brain to function very well. We haven't really, as scientists, understood the connections, though, because there's something called the blood-brain barrier, which many of you might have heard about. And this is a way, it's an extra layer on the outside of these vessels that really regulates what can get from the bloodstream into the brain and what can get from the brain back into the bloodstream. And for a long time, we thought this was a closed gate and there was no exchange, and we had no idea how importantly the brain is connected to the rest of your body through the vessels. We're now understanding a lot more about this. One thing that happens in a lot of patients with Alzheimer's disease is that the amyloid plaques that you've seen early in the first slide that we can detect in the brain they can also be found in the blood vessels of the brain. So on the left-hand side, all the yellow that you see in this picture is amyloid that is stuck within the vessels, and it makes those vessels in your brain stiff and hard to function properly. And on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see a very high-power image by electron microscopy showing how these little amyloid fibers are like thistles within the vessel. And it makes that vessel very difficult to function. So if there are problems with how the vessel works, the neuron doesn't function that well. This is because every time a neuron fires, every time it's active, every time you do a task, that neuron actually calls to its own partner blood vessel and says, give me more blood, I need more blood, but right here, right now. That is actually what we can see on a brain scan called functional MRI. What we're measuring is the change in blood flow that the neurons are calling for. So things that can affect the blood vessel health in your brain can alter that response and leave the neurons starved for the things that it needs to function well. So the other thing that was really exciting about the research in this area in the last few years is that we've realized that the major way that the amyloid peptides that are produced in your brain every day from birth on, the reason that they don't get stuck in your brain until you're older is because there are ways to get them out through the blood vessels. And most of this actually occurs when you're sleeping. So here on the left-hand side is a scan of a brain showing the release of these peptides under sleeping conditions. And when you're awake, the neurons are so busy calling to the vessels, and the vessels are so busy getting blood to your brain, that the release of A-beta from the central nervous system doesn't happen that efficiently when you're awake. So this is one of the reasons why sleep is really important. The sleep allows the vessels to have a little bit of a break from serving the neurons and let that A-beta out of your brain. There's other ways in which we are investigating how fats might lead us to new opportunities for therapeutics. So many of us have heard about good cholesterol and bad cholesterol and how your risk of heart attack is governed by the ratio of good and bad cholesterol in your major arteries. Now, in cardiovascular disease, on the left-hand side, what you're seeing is a cartoon of a blood vessel that has a lot of fatty deposits in it. What happens, so there are ways in which good cholesterol helps strip out that bad, or those fatty deposits within your brain. People that are overweight have less efficient mechanisms of all of this happening throughout the body, and on the right-hand side, you can see a brain scan. This is an analysis of how well the brain is metabolizing in a normal individual and compared to an obese individual. And you can see that the normal individual has greater activity within the brain region that is being studied. So this is, again, is a hint of an interaction between how well you are healthy overall and how well your brain works. So what is good cholesterol? It is what we call a lipoprotein, similar to ApoE, that circulates in your bloodstream. And we had been puzzled as to why it might actually be beneficial for brain health as well. There are some epidemiology studies that suggest that people with high levels of good cholesterol, and exercise and eating healthy can affect this, have a delayed risk or a lower risk of dementia later in life. So this is another reason why exercise and healthy eating, keeping your cholesterol balance in check, is important for your brain. One of the experiments that we have just done recently gives us what we call perhaps the initial proof of concept that targeting good cholesterol might be good for as a potential strategy for Alzheimer's disease. So this is an experiment where we were working with an animal model of Alzheimer's disease, and we gave this animal more good cholesterol just into the bloodstream. And what did we find? That that amount of good cholesterol was able to help the brain get rid of the A-beta peptides. Now, this is a really exciting result because it means for the first time we might have found a treatment that works from inside the blood vessel. That's very exciting, and might complement some of the other therapeutic approaches that are being tested right now. One of my colleagues in the pharmaceutical industry is always cautioning us to think we could have the best neuronal drug in the world, but if the vessels in the brain are not also healthy, it's not going to work probably that effectively. We might be looking at a future where there's combination therapy that helps the blood vessels function and helps the neurons function better. So while we're working on those strategies, the recommendations of a healthy diet and exercise are your best ways that we know of to keep your blood vessels throughout your body healthy. So again, I'm reiterating what we've heard before on the importance of this pathway. The other thing that we are doing in the laboratory setting is trying to figure out how this might work. So, for example, some of the things that we can do with blood samples that you've donated is to test how well your good cholesterol can help the blood vessels be healthy. So we are developing tests that maybe someday in the near future can be applied as a blood test to help identify people that are good candidates for certain types of treatments, or identify what exactly needs to be fixed, most of all, when we try to develop personalized treatments for dementia. And this is just one example of the many things that we're doing in the lab. So if you look at the right-hand side, I'm not sure how well you can see these, but on the top panel, hopefully you can see lots of little red dots. And on the bottom panel, you can see less red dots. So the red dots represent points of inflammation in the blood vessel cells that we can grow in a test tube when we add A-beta peptides on it. So we are mimicking the kind of pathway that the brain uses to get rid of the A-beta. When we include good cholesterol on those cells, you can see that the A-beta is doing far less damage to that blood vessel. So now this opens up a whole wealth of potential opportunities to interact with the cardiovascular health community and see if there are any possible treatments that we might be able to borrow that are already approved and safe and begin to test them in cases of dementia. So it's these sorts of questions and challenges that my group does behind the scenes so that we can offer new, innovative treatment programs and opportunities for trials to you. So just to sum up, we know that the brain function, 60% of your brain is made up of fats, and how those fats are assembled and structured in the brain is responsible for how your brain is wired together. The other way that fats can be important is that they affect the function of your blood vessels, and this is incredibly important for brain function, and that the good cholesterol, bad cholesterol ratio is emerging as an important area to keep an eye on, and that's something that can be measured and managed from the cardiovascular point of view. So while you're doing your yoga and while you're reflecting on the mindfulness, you can have these images in your head about, here's exactly how my blood vessels are working. We're preventing those thistles from happening. We're promoting good function and good connectivity between different areas of the brain. So I'm very grateful again for your attention. This is a picture of some of my team, all of whom work very, very hard behind the scenes so that we can understand exactly what happens in people with dementia, how to find it early, and how to treat it safely and effectively. Thank you very much.